Hello and welcome to episode number 348. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com, and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. You are listening to one of our premium episodes recorded especially for you, our paying subscribers. Thank you for your financial support of the podcast. If you have listened to our previous interview with Ron Black, then you know that all of us are superheroes. And even though we're superheroes, we still need a plan. Of course, in the comic books, superheroes always win, they always succeed. For us project leaders, of course, this means that we must focus on achieving project success. Ron Black says that successful project management depends on us project leaders doing things right and knowing our project success factors. And one of the chapters in his book, Leadership, the Everyday Superhero's Action Guide to Plan and Deliver High-Stakes Projects, talks about a success system for project leaders. So in this interview, we look at why high-visibility projects get more attention and discuss many of those project success criteria. And now, do you still have that cape? Enjoy the interview. Hello, Ron, and welcome back to the Project Management Podcast.
Hello, Cornelius. Good to chat with you again, sir.
Yeah. So when we discussed what we were going to talk about in our interview, you told me that you operate on the premise that we rarely know how to do things right. Wouldn't that basically mean that every project has to fail because we don't know?
That would be the fear, wouldn't it? And of course, that wouldn't get any of us very far. Our careers would suffer, our organizations would suffer, and we'd probably lose a lot of friends in the process. But no, I don't. And you know, I laugh about this once in a while, and I'm playful with this notion. But I want your listeners to know I'm deadly serious about our professional success, our professional reputations, and our organization success. I am deadly serious about it. But I do believe that we don't know what we're doing. Now, I don't admit that to my clients. Who would? I don't want you to admit that to your boss, listeners. But I do want us to acknowledge it to ourselves, because when we acknowledge the fact that we don't know all there is to know about a project, then it allows us to ask questions. And once we start asking questions, my goodness, it encourages other people to ask questions too. And before long, you've got a whole team that is challenging what we think we know about something, and I believe it helps us explore what is possible in a project.
All right. In our first interview, we looked at Chapter 1 and 2 from your book, the Superpower Points, and we are going to continue. So we will open up your book, Leadership, the Everyday Superhero's Action Guide to Plan and Deliver High-Stakes Project. We'll look at Chapter 3 and 4. In order to learn how to do our projects right. So chapter 3 is leading high-stakes adventures, and you have 5 superpower points here. And the first one is even superheroes need a team.
Perhaps especially superheroes need a team. You know, and when I think of a team, I think of sidekicks, and I like to be a good sidekick for my teammates as well. So, you know, it's that interactive involvement, engagement where we hold ourselves mutually accountable and one another mutually accountable in a really healthy, good communication team environment. So I think even superheroes need a team. It doesn't matter how good we are at what we do. Projects are well known to throw us interesting, exciting, and sometimes dangerous challenges. Projects generally are not easy. Hence, you know, it's easier to solve problems when there's several of us pulling together.
The second superpower point is high visibility projects get more attention and resources, making them more likely to succeed. This seems like an obvious one. Why did you include that as a superpower point?
Well, I did it because I want people to not let their guard down. I like to describe projects like rattlesnakes. Pardon me, but, you know, I grew up in the Rocky Mountains out in the boondocks. So, my grandmother always used to say, you know, watch out for the snakes. Well, you know, grannies will do that. But honestly, you got to watch out for projects. You have to have your 360-degree radar turned up on high gain at all times. And if you take a small project and a large project, and this is a rookie mistake. Rookies will often say, man, I don't want to do that big project because there's so much exposure. I would be so exposed. So many things can go wrong. And you look at the small project and you say, well, I can handle that. Not too much can go wrong. But I believe that small projects and big projects are just like rattlesnakes. Now, you take a big rattlesnake and everybody knows about it. It's in the middle of the trail and it's wiggling its tail and everybody stays away from it. Easy to spot, easy to respect. You take a little rattlesnake, you can sit down next to one and eat your lunch and not even know it. But a little rattlesnake, it can ruin your whole day. So I want everyone to respect small projects. A small project can ruin your reputation, I believe, faster than a big project. Now, if you think about that for just a second, on a small project, you're it. Who are they going to blame? On a big project, you're not only it. There's lots of finger pointing going on, and you're just one of a team member that failed. So not only are you able to share the blame in a large project when the dark force arrives, in a small project, if you beg for help, need resources, find an insurmountable issue that nobody thought of before you got started on this thing, and you scream for help, who's likely to get the resources? The big project everybody knows about or the little one nobody cares about? So I believe little projects are actually more dangerous to us as project professionals than large projects are.
I have an example for you here, and little and big are pretty relative. I used to work for a paper mill in Switzerland back in my very early days, and the paper industry in Europe at the time was in flux. Everything was changing. So the paper mill, they really invested heavily. And we're talking millions and millions and millions were invested into reinventing the company and making it fit for the new reality of paper production in Europe. And one of their small projects, actually, I believe it was the smallest project in the whole portfolio there, it was still 30 million Swiss francs in size. In today's money, it's about probably around 18, 19 million US, if you compare it. Mm-hmm. And that project was mismanaged completely. It was construction of a simple storage facility, the hall where all the papers would be put into. And it was so mismanaged, the quality was so bad that once the building was up, it was instantly condemned as unsafe and nobody was allowed to go in. It was really so badly done. So even though it's a huge project in, my personal view, because I've never led anything that big, it was still the smallest project from this whole thing. All the really big projects at the time got the attention. This small side project, just building the storage facility, unimportant. We're not looking at it. So while, small and big are relative, it still means, every project requires the appropriate attention that it deserves. And this was actually such a bad thing to happen. The paper mill was, about a year after that particular project was called a failure, had to be sold because they just, the money that was spent and wasted on that project, it broke the company.
You see this once in a while, and it's a sad thing. Let me flip that around as well and add to your thoughts here, if I might, Cornelius, because when I left my one of my businesses and went to work for a large corporate environment, I'm mostly a small business guy, but I did go to work for a large Fortune 500 defense electronics company, and I was in over my head. I just had closed this business, and I was desperate need to move on in my career. And out of a fluke, literally a fluke, I got hired into an industry I had no experience in. I mean, I'd fixed a few radios in the Marine Corps, but I really knew nothing about defense electronics other than being a radio tech. And I had a sales and marketing degree, but my goodness, I had a construction company in Wyoming. So this Boston company hired me to help run their field sales force. And I was in over my head, and I was desperate to climb up the corporate ladder to get to a livable wage and, feed my family. And I just did what I always did. I did what my parents taught me to do when I was running a small business. Act like you own the place, stand up on top of your desk, and try to make as good a decision as you can. And so, since I was in over my head, I had no other I had no other means of operation. So what I chose to do in that was to find a couple of small projects that I could make a genuine difference on. And it surprised, because I just kind of wanted to get my feet wet and feel the organization out and see how things went. So I did. And I had one little project in Santa Barbara, California, in a field office there that needed to be done, and nobody had really gotten it done. It had kind of been ignored. So I got it done, and it was really small. I mean, it was amazing how little it was, but it got done, and it got done when nobody else had been able to do it, only because they hadn't paid attention to it. So I did not know this at the time, but it gave me a reputation that kind of started sprinkling out through the organization. And then I got a little bit higher level visibility project that was also a very small project. And I executed on it, made myself a little plan and executed on it and saw some results. And this is a crazy story about my checkered past, but literally 7 weeks to the date after I'd been hired as a Western Regional administrative manager, my boss's boss called me up on the phone and he said, "Black." And I said, "Yes, sir." I thought he was going to fire me for doing this project or something. I didn't know how these big companies did things. And he said, "Black." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "I want you to get back here to Boston." And I said, "Sir?" I literally thought he was going to call me back to dismiss me. And he says, "I want you to come back and do for the rest of the world what you've been doing for the West Coast." And I said, "Sir?" And so I found myself 7 weeks after literally closing a construction company in Wyoming, moving to Phoenix, got this job by answering a want ad, just serendipitous, just flat luck, in over my heads, 2 little tiny projects, got noticed, and got yanked out of Arizona, moved back to Boston, and the next 3 years, I had a ball.
Yeah.
I established a reputation that I made things happen, and it served me very well. Well, for 2 years and 8 months, it served me very well. So, there's a flip side of that coin. The small project will build your reputation. You own it, you win, your reputation is gold. So, big snakes, little snakes. I'm with you on this one.
All right. Superpower point number 3. Given an understanding of the stakeholders, you can predict and avoid many common problems.
It always amazes me how people just fail to see problems coming. So if you'll take your stakeholders, if you know who your stakeholders are, each stakeholder group has, it has some chemistry. So for example, most of our project teams are pretty much extended teams anymore. We've got somebody out of this department and one person from that department. And, we got people spread from heck to breakfast coming together to make a project, to help a project get done. So whenever you have extended team members, there's a very obvious things you need to be careful of. And it is all communication based. Because when you've got an extended team member, you've got a person who's only putting part of their time into your project. What that means to me is they've got a boss they've got to keep happy. They've got issues and things that are high on their priority list. And guess what? If it comes down to making you happy on this project that they're only a part of, or their boss happy, you know who they're going to make happy. So extended team members, you can pretty much count on, they probably will be more difficult to fully engage than the people who are in that project as, for example, one of your core team members. If the project wins, they win. If the project loses, they lose. So they're fully invested in this project, whereas an extended team member may not be that fully invested. So that's an obvious result. So think of your project teams in terms of groups. Extended teams is one I always look for. Core teams. And, I speak like core teams are the best thing since sliced bread, but honestly, there's problems in a core team too. I mean, when you think about it, usually core teams are a team of experts who are pretty darn good at what they do and see the world through their lens, rightfully so. And so when you bring these various lenses together, you're going to have some potential for a disagreement on how to do things. So I'm always alert that a key core team issue is, how do we establish the appropriate approach, the best approach for this project? Not your way, not my way, not her way, but our way. So how do we find the strategic approach to the project from an expert standpoint? So you can expect to have those conversations, and a leader will expect to have to facilitate that conversation. One other one that's easy to spot right off the top is sponsors. Especially in large corporate environments. The VPs, the directors, the folks way up on the list, they have a different view of the world than we have when we're buried in the bowels of the building, making things happen, and rightfully so. But in the process, while they're looking at mission and vision and horizon, and we're looking at reality here at our feet, there's a very different viewpoints that are being considered. So when a higher up says, here's a project that needs to be done, and they throw it out to the project teams to make it happen, they don't want to have to think about it anymore. They want to think that it's going to go out there and get done regardless of the staffing, regardless of the resource loading, regardless of how many projects you got going on. They don't get it. And here's the fundamental rule that I live by. The farther you get away from the work, the easier it looks. And sponsors are typically a long ways away from your work. So our job as leaders, I think, of project teams is to make sure that we make those remote team members, whether they're sponsors or extended team members, right, bring them into the fold, keep them fully communicated, to help them see what we're actually dealing with. So that's a huge communication issue challenge that you can expect anytime you've got a sponsor that's less than fully engaged with your project team.
Yeah, and that takes us right to our next superpower point. High-performance teamwork can be built only on a foundation of mutual trust, genuine respect, and authentic participation.
I think all of us can relate to a project where the risk level or the comfort level amongst team members wasn't there. And if we don't have good comfort level, that good give and take with our colleagues, we're very reticent to say anything that might offend, anything that might show that we don't have perfect view of the world, anything that might, put us at risk in terms of, does this guy really know what he's doing? So without that trust and respect, we can't really communicate very effectively. So I often throw this out to my team members. What's more important? Knowing everything there is about a project so that you know who's right and who's wrong. That seems almost like an impossibility to me. Or the corollary to it is knowing who you can trust in your project. And literally, from my background, I'm always in over my head doing startups and turnarounds and projects I know nothing about the science or technology of and trying to lead them. I find myself constantly going back to that notion. I don't have to know everything about this project if I know who I can trust.
The fifth and final superpower point in Chapter 3, Leading High-Stakes Adventures, is this here. The superhero project leader improves team communications by bringing people together, increasing interaction, and facilitating collaboration. This seems like the things that we really should be doing.
Yeah, and it's how do we engage one another in conversation? How do we ask, listen, and learn from one another? And, obviously you can't do that forever. Nothing gets done. At some point in time, you have to make some decisions, make some choices, and move forward with the approach at hand. But my goodness, I have found so much value from asking people their points of view. It amazes me how people will go the extra mile when they know that their colleague is listening to their point of view. It just amazes me what they're offering. So, it kind of like when you ask, you naturally respect. You send this level of respect when you ask. When you listen, you reinforce that respect. And when you repeat it in your own words, when you learn from it and fire it back, and you've got that collegial interaction going, that's as good as it gets. It just builds a really strong environment for effective communications. Now, I didn't say they're easy, I didn't say it's unemotional, but it is effective if we can get to that level of facilitative interaction.
Which means we're moving now to Chapter 4, the superpower points, all about the superhero's success system. We have 4 of them, and the first one is project success or failure is determined in the beginning, not at project completion and close out. I think that kind of goes back to the superpower points we discussed in our first interview. Start slow, have a plan, right?
Yes, absolutely. Use a methodology that drives your thinking, a structured methodology that is based on learning as you move forward, viewing the future in a safe way, and then moving forward based on those decisions. So to give you a specific example, in the initiation phase of initiate, plan, execute, control, and close, of those 5 steps or those 5 phases of work in a project, in the initiation phase, there are always 6 questions I ask, and they help me understand, and they help my teams understand the project as well. And so those 6 questions are real simple, but they are my checklist. I don't go home without them. And in the order of priority, my first question is, what's the goal of the project? And if you'll ask your current team what the goal of the current project is, you might be surprised by their dumbfounded expressions. So making sure people are focused on the results that count, on the goal of the project, is always that first question I ask. Now, the second one is, what are the objectives? In other words, how are we going to approach this problem? There's always more than one way to achieving a goal. So the group of objectives that we want to deliver will hopefully then achieve the goal of the project. So that approach is where we bring our core team members together and make sure that we have a methodology that we can all live with, that we'll all have consensus to and will support. Once we know the goal and the approach that we're taking, then we can consider the third question: who are the stakeholders? So who's this going to impact, and who will be impacted by it? Because, there's an old saying in project management, in order to be successful, you have to make the stakeholders happy. The problem is there's a lot of stakeholders. So once we know a stakeholder's view, then and only then are we able to satisfy the stakeholders' expectations, manage their expectations, if you will. So the third question is the stakeholders. Now, once we know the stakeholders, then we can ask another important question that often gets ignored. Of all the questions, this one gets ignored the most. I like to ask my team, my sponsors, my experts, my extended teams, I like to ask everybody on the team point blank, what are our assumptions? And I think when we identify the assumptions, we vocalize them, we learn a lot. Sometimes it's surprising. In the least case scenario, it's still very beneficial, because I believe that the level of assumptions we make are a primary indicator of the risk that we are about to take on while doing this project. Bigger the assumption, bigger the risk. At this point in time, I want to know what my triple constraints are. How good, how fast, how cheap, what do I have to work with? What's my timeline? What do I really have to deliver? And then based on my assumptions and my level of risk, then I know how much I have to fight for, maybe a little extra time, or fight for maybe a few more resources than I can spot on justify, or fight for flexibility in the deliverables. So, if there's high levels of risk, I want more flexibility in my triple constraints, because flexibility gives us options to deal with the unknown and unknown unknowns. And then last, but not least by any case, I want to assess commitment of my team, the sponsors, the core team, the extended team members, and any remote stakeholders. And if there is commitment, then we stand a fighting chance of moving into a project and being successful, even if it gets difficult. But if we have little or no commitment, particularly by key members, if there is no commitment, then what we're doing is we have just designed a project to be a disaster. And frankly, I can't stand any disasters in my career. I'm only as good as my last project. How about you?
I'm usually as good as my next project.
Okay, I'll take that one.
Yeah. So the second superpower point here in the superhero success system chapter is that you cannot effectively lead a project team without a project process and supporting control documentation.
Yeah, I think we need the notion of stage gates, where we come to a clear point of decision. Do we know enough to go forward? Do we need to go back and investigate more, or negotiate more, or dig more, or should we kill this project before it kills us? So every project decision point, I think before we decide to initiate a project, we should ask that question. Should we initiate it? Or if doing so, will it just water down our resources? If we choose to initiate the project, and we've asked our 6 questions, and it seems reasonable that we move forward into planning, do we have enough information to plan? Or do we need to go back and get more information? Or should we kill this project before it kills us? 3 choices at every stage gate. The next big stage gate is after planning. Does the project look like it can be successful given the resources that we have, given the timeline we have, given the knowledge that we have? Or does it look like it's not likely to be successful given these conditions? Should we go forward into execution? Should we go back, fix our plan, or go way back and initiate a different sort of outcomes? Or should we kill this project before it kills us? So stage gate decision control is the hallmark of my leadership documentation process. And I want consensus and commitment. In some cases, when it's outsiders, I want signed contracts at these points. I want sign-off points, I mean, literally, legally binding documents. In smaller projects and smaller project teams, I want team consensus. Are we moving forward? Do we got to go back and fix something? Or should we try to throw this project out before it gets the best of us?
The next superpower point has to do with scaling. Scale and refine the process documentation to meet the needs of your project, organization, and industry. That just makes plain sense.
Yeah, it would seem to. But I'll bet you've seen situations where people have tried to use a massive project management methodology to drive a little project.
Absolutely. That was part of my work with my previous employer, a bank. They had this really huge 500-page methodology that we were supposed to use on our really mini projects that lasted for 6 to 8 weeks. And yeah, that didn't fly all too well. Yeah.
One of my clients had hired me to train up their project teams working in fire and security industry and of many other industries. And in the process, we were going over what we'd be covering in the coursework and trying to develop it suitable for their team's needs. And I asked him about what their process model looked like. And he says, "Yeah, we've got a pretty refined process model." I said, "Well, why don't you email it to me so I can take a look at it and make sure that, I'm not here to change the world. If it's working, let's use it. If it's not working, then let's tweak it, because you guys know what you're doing better than I do. Let's just make sure that the methodologies are sound." He said, "Yeah, sounds like a good idea." He says, "But I can't email it to you." And I said, "Yeah, what's the problem?" He says, "Well, it's a little large." I said, "You can't PDF or anything?" He said, "No, that's a little large." I said, "Well, can you FedEx it to me?" He said, "No, it's a little large." And I said, "Well, what's this process look like?" He said, "Well," he says, "actually, we've got all the process forms and checklists in the conference room right now." And he stepped up and went in there and he says, "I just counted them. There's 9 file boxes of it."
Oh my God.
That was exactly my response.
It's larger than anything I've ever seen.
I mean, talk about making a project out of a project. It was huge. Now, granted, this was a high-tech design, build, infrastructure business, and I get it. There's a lot of stuff that has to be done when you're designing things, building them, yada, yada. I get it. But for crying out loud, who's going to use it? So I actually convinced him to put that one on hold for a while and use my simple, scalable model, right? The 5 primary steps. If we're going to do this project, let's initiate it. Let's ask 6 good questions. If we're going to plan it, then let's plan it. And then I have a methodology for planning that you plan as much as you need, but no more than you need, because planning doesn't deliver results. Planning facilitates communication and control. But planning in and of itself is not results. So let's save our energy, to do things, to make things happen. So anyway, long story bearable, there's a right size process model for each of us in our industries, in our professional expertise area. And I want my colleagues, I want our listeners to trust themselves. They know their work better than anybody else. And so their process model, their approach is probably needs to be heavily weighted when they're running a project, when they're participating in a project.
The final superpower point for today actually follows up with what you have just talked about. An effective process model improves decisions, helps manage expectations, and improves collaboration among the project's stakeholders.
Yeah, I think it's kind of obvious, right? I mean, describing it as stage gates, because if you think about it, at each stage gate, it's a formal communication point where we get the appropriate people together, we have a melding of the minds, we have some sort of consensus, and then we move forward. So we all know what's going on as we move through the process. So the process model really is the backbone for communication. And the planning process, it's the backbone of communication and control.
Excellent. Those were the 9 superpower points from the 2 chapters we wanted to look at today, Leading High-Stakes Adventures and Superheroes Success System. To close out the interview, would you please summarize for us how an ideal project leader applies what we have heard today? Maybe give us, our listeners, 1 or 2 tips on how to achieve this, how to get there.
Yeah, I'd love to, Cornelius. One of the things that is so important for us, I think, as project management professionals and accidental project managers to keep in mind is everybody's busy. Communication is the core effort. I mean, everything we do in project management should improve communication and teamwork. Anything that we do in project management that doesn't improve communication and teamwork, I think is suspect. I think that maybe we ought to think about cutting it out and getting it out of the way so that we can focus on what really counts. And when I hone it down, to my little, idioms, if you will, of how do I run my projects, I think communication is so important, and that the ability to stand up and speak up is so important that I encourage people in a playful way. For example, it doesn't matter if you're a designated team leader or not. You can lead from anywhere in an organization. But if we see something going wrong, I want my colleagues to stand up and speak up. And I tell everybody at my first project meeting that I admire those who will take the risk and speak up when something seems awry to them, because together we are all better than we are individually. One of the phrases that I use to help stick this into people's minds is, if you wait too long, your options have been reduced. Your choices are gone. There is no chance to save yourself. But if you make the right choices early enough, then you have a much better chance, much better opportunity of being successful. So one of my mantras is the notion that if you've got to pitch a fit, well, be professional about it, but pitch that fit while there's still a chance it'll do us all some good. So, the short form of that one is if you got to go ugly early. Of course, you always want to be professional about this. I also like project leaders to dig and dig and dig by asking, and asking. And so I like, you ask somebody, how's a project going? And they say, yeah, it's fine, it's good, it's whatever. Well, look, that's a starting point, because I want to know, are you finished yet? And if they're not, I want to know, have you started yet? And if they have, then I want to know what obstacles they're running into. And so those are my 4 favorite project management questions. How's things going? Are you finished yet? Have you started yet? What are the obstacles? And of course, great leaders will follow that one up with, if you've got an obstacle, what are you going to do about it? And helping them address the issues and find the answer to those problems. So back to where we started with this, leadership takes courage. In every project, there will come a time, think of them as adventures, when things happen. We don't know everything we need to know, but we can learn it. We surround ourselves with worthy sidekicks who trust one another. And if we will take my old friend Johnny's advice and trust our cape, that is clarity, action, purpose, and enthusiasm, I think that we'll be more frequently successful at higher levels more of the time.
Once again, the book is called Leadership, the Everyday Superhero's Action Guide to Plan and Deliver High-Stakes Projects, written by Ron Black and published by the Mentor Group. And yes, you can find it on Amazon. I just looked at it a moment ago. It's there. Ron, thank you so much for your time today.
It's been an honor, sir. Thank you for allowing me to serve.
And that was our interview with Ron Black and his thoughts on leading successful projects. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you are a project manager who wants to become PMP or PMI ACP certified, then the easiest way to do so is with our sister podcast, the PM Prepcast and the Agile Prepcast, and study for the exam by watching the in-depth exam prep video training from pmprepcast.com. As always, you can find us here on the web at pm-podcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please don't forget to tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have a twisted saying for you. So we take a saying from general life and give it a project management twist. The saying today is, count your blessings. And for us project managers, it's more like, count your change requests. Until next time.